Have you ever wondered why, in a world full of modern technology, convenience, and information, millions of people are still searching for survival kits? Why would someone living in a developed, stable nation like the United States feel the need to prepare for collapse? Is it paranoia, media hype, or is there something much deeper, something rooted in human psychology? Today, we explore what lies beneath the rising trend of prepping in America and why people are searching for safety in a world that no longer feels safe. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years, especially after the global pandemic, political instability, and economic fluctuations, one online trend in America has caught the attention of psychologists and behavioral scientists alike: the dramatic increase in searches for the term survival kit. Now, at first glance, this may sound like simple preparation, a precaution against natural disasters or emergencies. But when we look closer, something far more complex is happening. This behavior is not just about storing food or buying a flashlight. It's a direct psychological response to what experts call perceived existential threat. You see, the human brain is designed for survival. For thousands of years, it has evolved to detect danger, real or imagined. But in the modern world, our threats aren't always physical. They are social, economic, political, and even philosophical. And when these threats become vague or hard to define, our brain begins to overcompensate. So what exactly causes people prep? The answer begins with a simple psychological principle. When the world feels unpredictable, the human mind starts searching for control. And the feeling of not knowing what's coming next, whether it's a war, a market crash, or a new pandemic, can be more terrifying than the actual event. Let's pause and understand this with clarity. The brain operates with two systems. One is a logical, reasoning system, and the other is the emotional, reactive system, what psychologists call System 1 and System 2. When bombarded with uncertain information, especially through the media or social feeds, the emotional system becomes hyperactive. It begins scanning for potential dangers, even if they're not present. This is what we call anticipatory anxiety, the fear of a future that hasn't happened yet. And here's the twist. The human brain doesn't differentiate between real and perceived danger very well. So even if there's no actual war or disaster occurring, the perception of instability is enough to trigger a survival response. This is where the concept of the survival kit enters. Buying a survival kit is not just a physical action. It's a psychological ritual. It says to the brain, I am not helpless. I have control. I am doing something. In psychology, this is often referred to as a compensatory behavior, an action taken to balance an internal feeling of vulnerability or powerlessness. Just like some people clean their homes when they're anxious, others stockpile supplies. And America, in particular, is experiencing a unique cocktail of uncertainty, from growing political divisions and inflation to the fear of technological collapse or climate change. Each of these factors may feel manageable on their own, but when they combine, they create a fog of instability that can overwhelm the rational brain. In this fog, people seek something tangible, something they can control, and that's when Google becomes their therapist. Typing survival kit is not just an act of curiosity, it's a cry for mental structure. But here's the deeper layer. When enough people start engaging in this behavior, it becomes a collective response. Prepping moves from an individual behavior to a cultural signal, a way of saying, we no longer trust that things will be okay. It's a societal loss of certainty, reflected in a personal act of preparation. And let's not ignore the influence of media. The constant stream of worst-case scenarios, whether it's economic collapse, war, cyber attacks, or disease outbreaks, fuels the imagination. Our brains are not evolved to handle 24/7 information. So, instead of processing calmly, we start anticipating the worst. And this anticipation becomes a habit, an emotional reflex. Eventually, people begin to feel like not preparing is riskier than preparing, even if they don't truly believe disaster is imminent. The logic becomes, if everyone else is buying a survival kit, maybe I should too. This is not madness. It's a perfectly logical response in an emotionally charged environment. So what we're witnessing is not the rise of fear, but the rise of responsive fear. The prepping movement is a psychological portrait of modern anxiety. It's what happens when societies feel they're losing the safety net, emotionally, politically, or economically. And so, the next time you see someone buying survival supplies or searching for prepping tips online, remember, they are not reacting to one event. They are reacting to the entire emotional landscape of our time. It's not just about food or tools or gear. It's about psychological survival. In an unpredictable world, one of the most powerful psychological needs is the need for control. Not dominance, not manipulation, but simple mental control. The feeling that we are not helpless passengers on a chaotic ride. This need becomes even more apparent when society begins to shift, shake, or slip into uncertainty. And this is where the psychology of prepping quietly enters the conversation. People preparing survival kits are often seen as overly cautious, paranoid, or even irrational. But what's happening inside the mind of someone who preps is actually very logical. From a psychological point of view, it's not fear that's leading the action. It's a desire to feel prepared. And more deeply, it's a desire to feel in control when the world no longer guarantees safety. When we feel overwhelmed by things we can't influence, like geopolitical conflict, economic downturns, environmental disasters, or even cultural changes, our brain starts looking for something it can influence. Psychologists call this the locus of control, the mental boundary between what we believe we control and what we don't, for mentally healthy functioning. Human beings need to operate from an internal locus of control, where we believe our actions can shape outcomes. However, during times of high uncertainty, such as the ones we live in now, that internal locus of control starts shrinking. People begin to feel like nothing they do really matters. Voting doesn't change anything. Protests go unheard. Even hard work may not protect against inflation or layoffs. The world becomes something that happens to us, rather than something we actively shape. This is where prepping serves a hidden psychological function. By organizing supplies, buying tools, planning for emergencies, and creating a survival kit, people are mentally shifting back into a state where they feel they're doing something proactive. It's not about whether a disaster will happen or not. It's about believing, if it does, I won't be powerless. That belief, even if never tested, restores a sense of psychological stability. This behavior is especially common in people who score high in anxiety sensitivity, a psychological trait where individuals are more aware of potential threats and tend to prepare more thoroughly for possible negative outcomes. But even those who are not typically anxious may begin prepping when they're exposed to sustained uncertainty over long periods, because our minds naturally seek order in chaos, and prepping offers a structure, a plan, and a script to follow. What's also interesting is that this desire for control through prepping is not limited to material preparation. It includes mental rehearsals, visualizing what one would do in case of collapse, developing checklists, watching videos, reading articles. Each of these actions signals to the brain, I'm not frozen, I'm moving. And in the world of mental health, that shift from frozen fear to active planning is immensely therapeutic. There is also a biochemical dimension to this. Studies in behavioral neuroscience suggest that taking action in the face of fear, even small action, triggers a dopamine response. Dopamine, the brain chemical associated with motivation and reward, is released not just when we succeed, but when we believe we're making progress toward a goal. So even the act of assembling a survival kit gives the brain a small dopamine hit, reinforcing behavior and creating a feedback loop. Anxiety rises, prepping begins. Dopamine releases, anxiety reduces, prepping feels good. And let's not ignore the symbolic power of prepping. For many, the survival kit isn't just gear, it's a mental anchor. It represents preparedness, independence, and resilience. It's a quiet declaration that I will not be caught off guard. In a world where people feel increasingly dependent on fragile systems, government, infrastructure, supply chains, building personal preparedness becomes a form of emotional autonomy. Another layer worth mentioning is the ritualistic aspect of prepping. Just as ancient societies performed rituals to appease gods and gain control over nature, modern individuals create personal rituals to deal with modern uncertainties. Prepping can become one such ritual, methodical, repeated, and symbolic. It gives a psychological narrative to uncertainty. And humans, above all, need narrative to feel stable. The danger, of course, lies in extremes. When prepping becomes compulsive, it may signal deeper anxiety disorders or obsessive-compulsive traits. But in its moderate form, prepping is not pathology. It's psychology doing its job. It's the mind reaching for tools to maintain internal balance in a world that feels increasingly out of balance. So when someone searches how to build a survival kit or buys a set of emergency food rations, what they are really doing is reconnecting with a feeling of personal agency. It may look like fear from the outside, but from within, it is often a hopeful act, a belief that with the right tools, they can weather whatever storm may come. In the end, survival kits are not just about surviving disaster. They're about surviving uncertainty and regaining a sense of control over a future that feels increasingly unpredictable. The rise of prepping culture in America isn't just about the individual psychology of fear or control. There's a broader, far more complex layer at play, the influence of media and the psychological force of collective behavior. In the modern age, people no longer respond to fear in isolation. They respond as part of a highly connected digital society, where fear spreads faster than facts, and trends become movements not through logic, but through repetition and emotional contagion. Media, both traditional and digital, plays a central role in shaping public perception. News headlines often prioritize fear-based content because fear captures attention. From a psychological perspective, this makes perfect sense. The human brain is wired with negativity bias, meaning we are more likely to notice and remember information that signals danger. This survival mechanism helped early humans avoid threats in the wild. But today, this same instinct is being triggered by glowing rectangles in our pockets. When a person watches a news segment about potential civil unrest, a looming recession, or international conflict, their brain begins to simulate those events emotionally. Even if nothing dangerous is happening in their immediate environment, the mental images are powerful enough to spark the same neural responses as real danger. This is what psychologists call vicarious threat exposure. And when this exposure is constant, it primes the mind to begin preparing for the worst. Now, multiply that process by millions of individuals consuming the same fearful content, and you no longer have isolated reactions. You have a collective psychological wave. One person searching for how to build a survival kit may be acting on their personal anxiety, but when thousands or millions do it within the same window of time, it becomes a signal. It becomes a behavior pattern that others begin to notice, adopt, and replicate, often unconsciously. This is how herd behavior is formed. And in the digital age, the herd doesn't need to physically gather. It forms through algorithms, trends, and suggestions. When someone searches for prepping content on YouTube or TikTok, they are quickly shown more of the same, not because of any dark intention, but because the platforms are optimized for engagement. The more you watch, the more similar content you're given. This creates what psychologists call a feedback loop, where the content you're consuming reinforces the beliefs you're already starting to develop. The danger in this system isn't necessarily misinformation. It's emotional amplification. If 10 people post about how they're preparing for the collapse of society, and those posts go viral, they begin to create a perceived social norm, the idea that prepping is something everyone is doing or should be doing. And in moments of social confusion, humans are incredibly prone to follow what seems to be the dominant behavior. This isn't weakness. It's evolutionary. Throughout history, humans survived not just because they were smart, but because they followed the group when danger was near. So when prepping becomes visible, it also becomes contagious, not in the viral, internet meme way, but in a psychological way. The behaviors of others shape what we believe is necessary for ourselves. This effect is even stronger in times of uncertainty. People don't just look to the news for guidance. They look to each other. They look at what friends are doing, what strangers are saying, what influencers are promoting. And if everyone is talking about survival gear, bug-out bags, food stockpiles, and worst-case scenarios, then that becomes a social reality, even if the actual threat hasn't changed. There's also an emotional comfort in knowing others are reacting the same way you are. It validates the fear. It makes it feel rational, even responsible. And so prepping begins to transform from a fringe behavior into a kind of moral imperative. If you're not preparing, you're being naive. That's how collective behavior shifts norms, not through official policies, but through shared emotional tone. This mass psychological shift can be incredibly powerful. It changes what people buy, how they think, what they plan for, and even how they see the future. And once it reaches a certain tipping point, prepping is no longer about individual fear management. It becomes a cultural movement. It becomes embedded in the narrative of a generation that feels let down by institutions, surrounded by instability, and hungry for self-reliance. The role of media in this transformation cannot be overstated. From the way headlines are written to the emotional framing of content, media doesn't just report on fear. It shapes how fear feels. A carefully worded headline can make a possibility sound like a certainty. A dramatic visual can make a remote risk feel like an imminent threat. And when these emotional cues are repeated daily, they train the audience to respond emotionally rather than rationally. Over time, people don't even remember where their fear started. They only know that it feels urgent, personal, and real. And this is the moment where prepping becomes normalized. Not because every individual has a logical reason to prepare, but because the environment, the digital, social, and psychological environment, makes it feel irresponsible not to. And in that context, the survival kit is no longer just a physical object. It becomes a symbol, a response, a statement, a quiet way of saying, I see what's happening. I'm not waiting to be rescued. I'm ready. This is how media influence and collective behavior together shape not just what people do, but why they do it. And it reminds us that in a connected world, emotions don't stay private. They scale, they spread, and they become culture. In the end, the growing obsession with survival kits isn't just about preparing for disaster. It's a window into the human mind under pressure. When uncertainty surrounds us, our brains naturally seek control, predictability, and a sense of safety. Prepping, then, is not madness. It is meaning, a deeply human, psychological act in response to a world that feels increasingly fragile. From the individual level, where one person attempts to regain control through preparation, to the societal level, where fear is shared, amplified, and adopted as culture, prepping becomes more than just collecting supplies. It becomes a symbolic gesture of autonomy, of mental readiness, of emotional survival. What we're witnessing is not the collapse of reason, but the evolution of how reason adapts under threat. In a hyper-connected world, where media delivers daily doses of potential disaster and social cues create invisible pressure to conform, people aren't simply reacting. They're responding the only way their minds know how. Survival kits may look like rope, batteries, and dried food, but beneath those items lie psychology's deepest needs: safety, agency, and control. And that is what makes prepping such a powerful mirror of our modern emotional state, not just in America, but everywhere uncertainty lives. Thank you for listening. And as always, observe the world, understand the mind, and prepare not just for what might happen, but for how you might feel when it does.